G'day, welcome to the Indian Grain Storage Hub concept. This is a detailed report prepared by Pulse Australia for the Department of Agricultural, Fisheries and Forestries. Provides a number of practical initiatives for the Indian grain storage and handling market to modernise and prosper. As a part of the package, we're preparing a series of technical webinars that have been developed across a number of speciality areas. These include grain storage, grain pests, quality assurance and marketing, blockchain solutions, and practical on-ground investment and implementation initiatives. I'm Chris Orcott. I'm the Director of Ag Perspectives and the lead consultant on this project. Today's webinar is models for commercial investment in grain storage. The subject matter expert is Peter Wilson from Wilson International Trade. Peter has around 35 years experience in trading agricultural commodities. Currently, Peter is the Managing Director of Wilson International Trade, a business providing superior supply chain and consulting services to global grain and pulse trade. Peter has broad experience in plant genetics, commercialisation of varieties, agronomics, customer service, market development, supply chain management and contract execution. He's held board and executive and senior trading positions across a number of private, international trading and logistic companies in Canada and Australia. Peter holds postgraduate qualifications in agribusiness from Monash University and has lectured in agribusiness, supply chain, risk management subjects at the University of Queensland. He operates a mixed farming and cattle breeding operation on the Darling Downs in Queensland. Welcome, Peter.
G'day, Chris. How are you?
Good, thank you. So I think, as you see from Peter's bio, got extensive experience across the grain supply chain, with particular experience in the pulse market in both Australia and Canada, and has been actively involved in trading with the Indian market over your 35-year career, Peter.
Yeah, so I've got a pretty good insight as to what works and where we've come from in the pulse market specifically over the last 30 odd years. And India is still the most important consuming country for food pulses in the world, and it's so exciting to be part of this project that might allow us to just continue to grow that market, make that destination market a little bit more efficient in the way it operates, and improve fundamentally the reliability of the supply chain and the quality experience right through to the consumer. So this is it was an interesting project, and certainly one that's got some real potential to be implemented.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think with your broad experience, we'll cover a lot of different areas today, Peter. And really, it's around what are the options for the Indian market to develop more commercial storage options that, as you say, can potentially reduce the losses that we have in storage in the Indian market. So I'll hand over to you, Peter.
Yeah. So look, with anything, with any idea, with any sort of proposal, the why is really important. And if there's no why, then there can be no follow-on, because if there's no reason, then there's really no point. But it's very, very important to look at the potential for saving losses in terms of in-store grain losses or supply chain losses through the Indian market. And it's very hard to get an accurate figure, but 4 to 6%, 12 to 18 million tonnes across India was probably conservative. I've certainly been in a lot of grain storage and processing facilities, and I've seen the losses through insect infestation. There's a lot of issues with regards to just the porous nature of the supply chain. So you do have pilferage, where product literally walks out the door, and you do have rain spoilage or weather spoilage, both in crop at harvest time, and then where the product might be stored in between delivery and then in a storage location. So there's an enormous amount of opportunity to reduce those losses. And, a country like India with, heading towards what, the high almost 2 billion people by, the latter half of this century, we can ill afford to lose product that has been successfully produced by farmers.
And it's interesting, in some of the other webinars, Peter, we kind of cover what we do here in Australia, and look, the losses in Australia are probably from 0 to 0.5%, aren't they? So quite small in comparison to what's happening in India, and that's really just a function of how our storage and handling system has evolved.
Yeah, and look, losses are genuine, and they add cost to the supply chain. So it means that someone's going to get that money back from someone or somewhere, and that can only be from the consumer or the producer. And so, tight supply chains can't afford any losses, and so we need to reduce them.
Absolutely.
So I guess we've over time we have talked about the opportunities for what the drivers might be to change, because even in Australia, we know that, and we've seen significant structural change to the way grains are even produced, but also how our supply chain works. And little things like the fact that historically we used to store product in sheds and porous concrete silo structures because we used contact pesticides to manage our insect risk. And clearly, with pesticide residue free demands from our customers, Australia had to change the way it stored grain and how it managed insect infestation, and so that created significant structural and infrastructure changes to the way Australia operated. So the same thing in India, but on a bit of a micro scale, because of the way the Indian system operates, particularly for pulses. And so we need to really understand what's gone before us to be able to look at some modifications. So, we've got to have to work with the industry. You can't just go in and say, right, this is the way it's going to roll, because it takes time. So we need to understand what's happening, and we need to work with the key stakeholders so that we build trust and understanding, and then you look at the opportunities that might be to deliver. So, and again, I come back to the why, and that will become the driver of any of those sort of conversations around how you might move to the next stage. So, ultimately for me, part of this project, we look at what does success look like, and it's equity and distribution of supply chain savings. So everybody should benefit from a more efficient receival, storage, cleaning, transportation piece. Food safety, absolutely critical. And many people look at developing nations and think, well, they don't care about food safety or food quality, and that's simply just not true. Everybody wants to put the best food in front of their families,
yes,
or their customers if you're in the food service business. So food safety is critical. Worker safety, here in places like Australia, we consider a work safe environment is just what happens when you walk in the gate or in the shed. And the same thing should be a key driver in places like India. We need to make sure that people aren't inhaling dust, and that they're in facilities where they're not going to get head knocks, tripping hazards, all those sorts of things. So work safe has got to be a key component, and shortening and making those supply chains more efficient is absolutely critical, because you can ill afford to lose physical product, but you could also ill afford to lose money in inefficiency in its supply chain, the way the grain's cleaned, the way the product is moved, all those sorts of things, Chris.
Absolutely. So,
but I think just to retrace a little bit, we need to understand, the way the government has set up stock holding is a consideration. The trade can't really hold significant stocks. The farmer can. and the government wants visibility on stock. So there's a few people we've got to keep happy in this process.
Absolutely. Yep.
So if we look at some of the realities around the supply chain, in Australia, we have very much a bulk supply chain. Everything is harvested relatively quickly at the optimum time. We are still dealing with genetics that require hand harvesting. So where product is physically removed from the ground by hand, by workers. In some cases, they come from far and wide for the harvest, and then it is subsequently threshed in the paddock, and you can see some fairly basic separation happening at the farm level. So, probably that's reality until we get some more aerially seeded varieties that you could get a combine harvester to go through quite freely. We are still dealing with this type of the front end of the supply chain, if you like. So, very good yields, beautiful quality, but, harvesting is a fairly, very manual, very physical
process.
process.
So there's another webinar that we've done, Peter, called Australian Storage, Grain Storage, the Australian Way. And we've got Chris Warwick, who's been involved in the GRDC grain on-farm grain storage project for 10 or 15 years. So that kind of covers very broadly, what we do and the management practices we have here in Australia. So it really contrasts about, the system that we've got here with what happens in India.
Yes, exactly. So you can sort of see and of course, there's a tremendous amount of pride with the effort that's put in. When you end up with a mountain of product that then's got to be subsequently threshed, and of course, nothing is wasted. All of the product that you can see there, ends up either in the form of grain in bags or a cart, and of course the fibre that's left is made available to the animal feeding industry. So there is certainly no waste and no suggestion of waste, given the centralised nature of that harvesting process. But it does leave it exposed to the weather. And of course, if there are delivery problems and you can't actually thresh because you can't get it delivered, then you have exposure, because the farmer may take the view, well, I'll just leave it in the paddock until delivery can be effected. And of course, a thunderstorm comes through and it can downgrade quality, and therefore your price returns significantly. So, there's plenty of evidence of growth in direct harvesting. That's a cereal crop, but logically cereal's a little bit further above the ground, which means you can get that front underneath it. And but pulses are still a little bit short in India. But we definitely see the mechanisation of Indian agriculture.
Yes.
So looking at some of the the models that might work, and for me it is, I talk a lot about complementarity in the pulse business, whether it's the future of food and how we might consume more pulses with our regular foods, even in the West, where we do consume a lot of a lot of other cereals and pastas and meat products. The opportunity for pulses to add a lot of complementarity to those dishes are no less real in India. So it is for me a piece about complementarity, and we need to work with, in part, the existing system to maximise the chance of success. So, I think you would start this process in a fairly modest way. I don't think you'd go out big bang and try and build some sort of testimony to engineering prowess. I think you would start relatively small and you'd prove out the concept. So you'd want to you'd want to have, a fairly definitive ownership structure. You want to involve parts of the supply chain that are critical to make it succeed. So it needs to be based on profit. And let's say that right up front, because if it can't regenerate itself, it can't maintain itself through reasonable profits, then it'll end up being disrepair. So it's got to be a profitable exercise. The potential opportunities for ownership is to have one person own it, a joint venture of some description with existing millers, who may well benefit from having a centralized storage location away from their mills and then bringing it in. You may choose to go down a grower-owned cooperative type structure, and there would be opportunities to look at that. But given there are multitudes of farmers, whether you could coalesce enough of those around a concept of this, that might be difficult, but not impossible, but certainly worth considering. And also you've got input suppliers. India is certainly growing in terms of its use of synthetic fertilizers and other inputs that are used on farm, and they may well see this as a counter-cyclical opportunity to their business. So and none of this would be particularly foreign to anybody looking at this sort of thing, because it's the same sort of stuff we might consider.
Yeah, but I think it's probably that one of your key points you might is that it's got to be integrated within the supply chain, whether it's whether you've got a relationship with the customer where the product's going to go, or with some of the input suppliers on fertilizer and chemicals. So that makes it gives the probability of success a better chance, I think, if you're more integrated with up and down the supply chain.
Yes, absolutely. And then for me, the critical control points are going to be, you've got to make sure you take people with you. You've got to build trust in that supply chain. A lot of people, want to go and, visualize their product being sold at a Mundi. It's a bit of a social occasion, all those sorts of things. And it doesn't cut out a Mundi, but it does absolutely change the way product might trade, might be moved, where it might be stored. And, I think that we've got to build that trust. The initial investment needs to be sensible. You need to be able to scale it. And all through that process, you must be able to build trust, visibility around the scaling of the product, just simple weighing of the product, that people can understand what they're delivering and where it's going to go, and that there's documentation that might flow from that makes it very, very clear to the supplier that they're being respected through that part of the supply chain. That's not it's not in any way opaque. Yeah. And then, of course, location, and we know that having siting these sorts of assets on logistical pathways, existing pathways, you don't want them off the beaten track. And maybe it needs to be accessible to either major roadways or, in fact, rail. Rail is very, very important in India, so there's no reason why such a thing couldn't be co-located within a logistics hub of some description. So,
yep. And I think just on your trust piece, Peter, around the training and education, we've got another webinar with Grain Trade Australia on which kind of goes through a lot of the I suppose how the industry operates here in Australia with the industry code of practice. Yeah. Just to understand, so the Indian market can get an understanding of kind of how the industry operates in Australia. And also there's another webinar which Emma Weston's going to talk about blockchain and how we can use more the modern kind of trading solutions to be able to ensure people understand the product and the quality and get paid at the end of the day, because everyone, this whole chain is important about money transfer, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. At the end of the day, it's a conversion process, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
You're converting a chickpea into cash that you can then use to buy other products for goods and services for your farm or your family. So this is all about conversion, and it's all about having transition points in the supply chain. And we want to, ultimately, I think we want to reduce the transition points, and I think we want to reduce the opaqueness of those transition points. Yeah. And where we can use technology to make that whole process, much more transparent and instantly visible in terms of the outcome, I think is important.
Yep.
And so these are some of the milling experiences that I've had, and clearly there's been changes over 20 or 30 years, but fundamentally you're still dealing with bagged cargo. Now, my experience with bagged wheat and barley as a young man, or as probably as a teenager or preteen, a horrendous storage product or a storage container to keep insects and vermin out of. It's it's just brutal. And of course, that's where it all started, the Hessian sack. But, we need to get grain off the ground. We need to get grain on bags again, away from walls. We need to have them have that dust contained, and we need to make sure that more of the grain that comes in the door goes out as either dal or other product, or as flour. It shouldn't be feeding insects, and it shouldn't be feeding vermin. So we've got to keep that at the forefront.
Yep.
So really, the storage hub concept is, that you're going to have. It's going to be part of a network. It's going to be integrated in terms of, that handling piece, that receival of grain, that I guess the veracity around what's coming in. So having a proper process around grain quality analysis, the sampling, and then once it's being stored, that making sure that you've got, you can maintain that integrity, that quality in store, and then of course your potential technology around the provenance of all of that through that logistics supply chain, and that you are keeping that training and trust building, and you potentially create more marketing and trading options. A lot of people, and we probably still do it in Australia, where you're forced to sell something because either you haven't got adequate storage, and so you're making decisions that are, at times, which really doesn't suit the owner of the goods, wherever they might be in the supply chain. But once you have good, reliable storage and logistics solutions, it creates options.
Yeah.
And you and I have seen the grains industry in Australia move from a very orderly marketing system, where there was no decision made by the farmer in terms of how or where a product moved, right through to now farmers can, they have got storage on farm. They can literally monetize that grain in store on their farm. So they're not there's no forced sale position now in Australia.
But I think that's a great point, Peter, is that, us building these storage and having these options, do give the farmer, whether it's in Australia or India, more options to be able to market and sell their product, and, as you say, monetize it. So it's been here in Australia, it has been a quantum shift over the last 20 or 30 years, in that, the farmer now has control over marketing and selling their product, and they're all very excited by that.
Exactly. And if you can then, use the use of technology, sampling, analysis, you can then start aggregating lots. And then once you have an aggregated lot, you can then talk to a customer, a miller, and say, this is what we've got in some degree of volume. And then they can set their mill up for a significant run, rather than, say, almost a bag lot run. And that changes your efficiencies in your facility. And it might then start driving more investment in facilities to be able to handle larger volumes and in bulk and all those sorts of things. So, and those sorts of things are happening in India, but they're still dealing with relatively small lots. And I think there'd be some major efficiencies to be had by that aggregation.
Yep.
Aggregation of product along, homogeneous quality standards. I mean, it took Australia a long time to move from state-based pulse standards to a national, homogeneous and largely harmonious view of, a lentil produced across state lines might look like. And,
Yes.
Now Australia's got one of I think, the most robust quality sampling and analysis systems in the world, and people buy product with great confidence. And there's no doubt that the same thing, couldn't be done in other destination markets.
Absolutely.
So we sort of talked about the sort of services that these sort of entities could participate in, but really you're just talking about, pretty good quality receival and storage facilities and outturning facilities that make them more efficient. And we talked a little bit about the governance structures, and I think it's very, very important if we move forward into some of these concepts, that we do start with really solid governance models. No one wants to see money invested that then gets wasted. We want to make sure sensible construction, we want to make sure it's functional, we reduce those transition points inside the plant, which increases damage. So we want to reduce the damage that happens inside the asset. We want to make sure those ownership structures stand up to the test of time. And I think, you know, the hub will then, you know, the opportunity for that sort of hub to coexist within the existing supply chain and potentially a village or co-located with freight yards, then you know, it's got a really good chance of success. And keeping it, you know, keeping the model fairly flexible in terms of what you build on site means that the asset can be fairly nimble in what it can handle. You know, you don't just build an asset that can handle chickpeas.
Yes.
You build an asset that can handle chickpeas and lentils and wheat and barley and other products. So self-cleaning bins is absolutely important. You know, your overhead structure is critical to make sure those you cannot, or you reduce the opportunity for contamination on site, and that is critical in storage. You don't want to have, you know, $1,000 product degraded because, you know, $200 a ton barley or something else ended up on top of a bin full of $1,000 Kabuli chickpeas. So, you know, we've got to make sure it's functional and that you use the best technology to make sure that you reduce contamination risk.
Yep.
The other reason I think vertical storage is critical is, you know, places like India, land is at a premium. So you can't, you know, I think the days of building big sprawling sheds, I think they're done by and large to store bags. You've got to look, you know, you've got to go up. You can't go out.
That's a great point. So
you know, the excitement of the local Mundi doesn't have to go away, because maybe it becomes a point where your samples come in and traded, and then the bulk of the product is transferred to another site, or product is aggregated at a Mundi site and then shipped off in its various quality lots to a thing. So, you know, these things can integrate quite successfully with the existing model. But you can see there, you know, you can imagine just how dynamic that marketplace is. You know, it's you know, there's a lot of moving, there's a lot of touching and feeling and smelling, and people know precisely what they're buying. And so the system is well established, and we need to find a way to, you know, integrate such a hub, storage hub, with the existing system. And, you know, I don't expect for a moment that it might look like the shot on the right, but, you know, that's a facility that probably holds 15 to 20 odd thousand tons in a very, very small footprint.
yes.
And I think that's a major point.
Yep.
I mean, conceptually, there'll be a dozen different ways you could build a storage hub, but you start by being modest. You know, you might just start with a small number of silos, but expandable. You have a very simple grading and cleaning facility, bagging facility, because a lot of your customers may still want to receive product in bags, depending on how big the mill is. Because you've got to remember, in places like India, you're dealing with large mills, but you're also dealing with very small mills, and you know, where they might be still using stone grinding facilities that, you know, are down to just you know, really small amounts of product in almost a small component of a village, in terms that's their local mill. So it needs to be flexible, is my point. Discharge bulk, discharge, you know, pack bags, but all the way through, you're overlaying your quality system. And I think that's the critical integrity. Your weighbridge is your most important asset in a grain handling facility.
Absolutely, yeah. And you look there, Peter, you know, the weighbridge and the testing area, you know, is such an important piece in this facility. And it's really, in Australia, it is the first and, you know, most important piece when the grower delivers to one of these common storage sites. So that piece for us is about managing the quality through the whole chain. It's so important.
Because ultimately it's all about, you know, that provenance, that integrity through the supply chain, that builds that trust in the system and in the owners, because you have transparency. You know, you drive your tractor or your cart onto the weighbridge, you can see the digital readout, you unload, and then you go back and you can see the digital readout. You know precisely what you've dropped off. It's not a game. It's you know, it's just right there. So transparency is everything. So I think, you know, probably getting very close to wrapping it up, but the outcomes, and I think outcomes are really important. I mean, so many times we do things and we don't think about what success looks like, and we don't focus on the outcomes. We spend an enormous amount of money, and you know, people say, well, what did you achieve? And it's like, well, not much. But so we must be focused on the outcomes. Supply chain efficiency, transparency, integrity must be an outcome. There's got to be, you know, more, you know, better, more reliable farm gate cash flows. If we want people to participate in it, there must be financial reward. You know, the days of the vibe or the, you know, feel good outcomes, you know, the only way we can really measure things is by an improvement in our profitability or our cash flows. We have to be able to improve the outcome for millers, again, because we want them to participate in the supply chain. So they need to see that buying a larger, more homogeneous lot of product will deliver milling efficiencies. And that's, you know, again, it becomes a simple discussion. And right the way through, you know, government in India is very, very sensitive to food supply and the cost of that food supply. So having the government involved and have the government trusting in this sort of concept is absolutely critical. And the consumers are very, very important in the process. They need to see some degree of benefit, you know, an enhanced quality offering, or maybe some lower prices through better efficiency. So, you know, we've got to bring the consumer and the government along as well. And of course, the continued move towards validating workers. People have every right, doesn't matter where they are in the world, to turn up and work safely and return to their families at the end of their shift. It should be no different in India as it is in Australia. So, you know, again, if part of our process is delivering that sort of focus, then I think that's be a tremendous outcome.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. And yeah, the outcomes are very important at the end of the day. And as you say, you know, we've got to make sure that stuff, the concepts and the plans that we do roll out are profitable at the end of the day, because you know, that people with up and down the supply chain are able to generate a return or savings out of what we're implementing.
Yeah, and in the end, we may end up with a concept that we could replicate, and that you start then talking about, you know, raising funds to provide, and you could provide I guess a bankable idea. Yes. Where investors would be keen to be involved, be they, you know, bigger companies or a bigger farmer co-op or whatever it might be, but it becomes a fungible asset, and that people are actually keen to be associated with and then participate in, because it, you know, it works. And yep. I think that's an important part of it as well. So I think in aggregate, we've come to the end of the webinar, but I think we've demonstrated there's some real opportunities to drive some of those efficiencies that the supply chain does crave, to reduce those losses and get the complementarity going right through the supply chain, and so that you can share some of the benefits of these sorts of initiatives. So
yeah, I think, thanks, Peter. I think, yeah, it's a great summary of, I suppose, how we can try and implement the concept plan in India in a practical and accessible manner, so that, you know, all sectors of the industry can, you know, improve efficiency and generate more returns and more profitability. And that's what we're all about at the end of the day. So I think, Peter, with a wealth of knowledge across supply chains in Australia, but also his experience in India, provides us the ability to be able to kind of apply the concepts and what we've learned in Australia, and hopefully bring a practical solution to India. So thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Chris. Always a pleasure.
Okay, thank you.